Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion on invisible frontiers, locals leading humanitarian negotiations. My name is Armando Palacios. I'm a security advisor of the Médecins du Monde network. Let me tell you some words before starting. In recent years, the context on working conditions for humanitarian negotiation and for humanitarian actors have become increasingly difficult, volatile, and insecure. Humanitarian aid is not only being politicized, but also instrumentalized, creating invisible frontiers that make our work in fragile contexts even more complicated. Today, we will discuss the front line of humanitarian negotiations, where these challenges are often most acute. But before we dive into this conversation, I would like to challenge you, particularly those of you who represent international NGOs. Let me ask you a question. When decisions are made in the context where you work, how often do they come from local communities or national NGOs? Let's be honest, not much. We often, international NGOs often speak about decolonization and localization. But in many cases, this means little more than transferring risk to local actors, but not power. Usually, international NGOs hold onto the authority while expecting national organizations to assume the burden. International NGOs may have good intention of sharing power and decision-making, but the reality is that the imbalance remains. I believe in localization too, but I'm a coordinator within my organization, and I'm European, white, and male. And in most of the projects I work on, final decisions mostly come from the headquarters. Regardless of our best intentions, we continue to perpetuate hierarchies. During the preparation of these panels, I've been deeply challenged to confront these uncomfortable truths. Today, we have the opportunity to listen and learn from local humanitarian workers from national organizations. Local actors are deeply rooted in their communities and regularly negotiate access to delivered aid. Yet, they are often the least protected, the most exposed, and the most excluded from decision makers. We will look at how they navigate these invisible borders and what international NGOs as international actors can do to truly support them without imposing their models. We will examine how local and national actors negotiate access. We will discuss what happens when humanitarian principles are questioned in these negotiations. And we will explore how national NGOs tackle ethical dilemmas in ways that may differ from how international NGOs approach the same challenges. To address these issues, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Hamsatu Allamin, he's the founder and executive director of the Allamin Foundation for Peace and Development in Nigeria. She's also founding member of the International Women Alliance for Security Leadership and an executive council member of the Woman Peacemaker Program. Welcome, Hamsatu. Thank you to be here. Khalil Karimi is the head of operation of the Razi Social Development Organization, which provides humanitarian assistance to vulnerable households in the west zone provinces of Afghanistan. We are so happy to have you here, Khalil. Arquímides Farías, who is joining us online from Venezuela, is a humanitarian professional with over 20 years of experience in managing programs with national organizations in challenging environments. He specializes in livelihood, local capacity building, and humanitarian negotiation. We deeply appreciate your presence, Arquímides. And also line, Dr. Kristina Roepstorff is associate professor at Otto-von-Guericke University in Magdeburg and senior researcher at the Peace Research Institute Oslo, known as PRIO, She focuses on ethical dilemmas in humanitarian negotiations. We are excited to hear your contribution, Kristina. Thank you. Okay, to thank you again to all four panelists for your participation today. We are looking forward to a dynamic discussion with you, and afterward, we will open the floor to questions from both in presence and online audiences. Actually, please feel free, let me remember, to share your thoughts or questions anytime on X, formerly Twitter, on #HCBerlin. And nothing, let's start. But before starting properly with the discussion, we would like to share with you a brief video provided by the Center on Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation. This will offer us a glimpse into the specific challenges faced by local staff in humanitarian negotiation and set the stage for our conversation today. It's going to be just a couple of minutes.
When disaster strikes or a humanitarian crisis hits, local actors often are the first to respond. They are the ones with the best knowledge and understanding of their context. They are the ones who are the first to analyze how to respond.
Today, the hardest negotiations are done at the front lines. They are done by local staff providing the aid, gaining access, and reaching the communities that are targeted.
Nosotros conocemos el contexto, conocemos el territorio, los actores, y es muy importante esa respuesta inicial.
We've been responding even before the escalation of the conflict.
Local actors will have greater contextual capacity and often also will be able to build trust sooner, or they already might have the trust with the particular counterpart.
These professionals are the best suited to take action right in the aftermath of a crisis. However, they often lack opportunities to train their skills and share their experiences with colleagues working in other contexts.
It's important to equip these staff with the negotiation skills needed in order to have a systematic approach to the negotiation.
But being a host national society and increasing its capacity in negotiation, and humanitarian negotiation is a crucial one.
On se focalise sur la localisation de l'aide également pour faciliter le renforcement des capacités des organisations locales pour que l'aide soit vraiment beaucoup plus efficace et inclusive.
At CCHN, we believe in supporting those who are first on the ground. Together, we make humanitarian negotiations more effective.
Okay, so as mentioned, as you have seen, CCHN has provided this video. For those of you who don't know CCHN, it's an organization created by ICRC, MSF Switzerland, UNHCR, and WFP. And its mission is to facilitate the capture and analysis and sharing of experience and best practices in humanitarian negotiations. They offer free and inclusive negotiation training and nurtures a community of practices consisting in over 8,000 members from more than 400 organizations in 150 countries. So they are doing a great work, so thank you very much to them. If you are interested in having more from them, they have a stand at the first floor. So let's start with the discussion, properly set. Let's start with you, Arquímides. During your extensive humanitarian experience, you have maintained relationships and conducted negotiations with international and national organizations, as well as with the governmental agencies in Venezuela and local community. From your point of view, how has this environment and the challenges of humanitarian negotiation changed in recent years, and what factor has contributed to this? Arquímides, can you hear me? Arquímedes, can you hear me? I don't think so. Kristina, you can hear me? It's not working. Arquímedes, can you hear me? Okay, but we
yes,
cannot
I can hear you clearly.
Okay. So the first question was for you. How has the environment and the challenges of humanitarian negotiations changed in recent years, and what factor has contributed to this?
Well, good afternoon to everyone. I have to say first, before I dive into the specific answers, that I thank you all for the invitation, and I am honored to be here among my fellow colleagues. Well, humanitarian negotiations requires information, a network of relationships, and the legitimacy of the actors to be succeed. Now, all these variables move at increasing speed, augmenting uncertainty, and with limited resources. Here, technology is playing a great role. Also, the complex nature of the crisis, where political, economical, and social factors contribute to the long-lasting situation, with too many stakeholders involved, when it's difficult to identify the sets of interests and positions that are on play. Non-state armed groups controlling territories, authorities from the different levels of government, national, local, regional, military forces, local communities, NGOs, with all the mandates they have, and the international crime organizations that are playing the territories. This all makes a kaleidoscope for negotiation, making it harder. I have this general rule of thumb. The probability of reaching a negotiable agreement is inversely proportional to the number of stakeholders involved. So this is a scenario of a greater number of stakeholders make us a complex environment for negotiation. Also, the long time of the conflict is another key aggravating ingredient, because there is no ending time on site for the crisis, and this protracted crisis scenario emerged for the vulnerable populations, stressing situations for too much time for too many stakeholders. The speed of information and disinformation, propaganda, changing in real time, all the judgment we made, all the analysis we made for the negotiation processes, and an increasing visibility of our actions and all its consequences. You can have a photo of your CEO or your chief just in front with another part of the conflict, and it makes it harder. Humanitarian access is at risk because of a hostile environment against humanitarian organizations on the field where there is polarization and the presence of irregular activities or crime. And I'm going to stop on this on polarization. Polarization is a great obstacle to all levels of operation on the field. From collecting information for a need assessment to the delivery of aid, it played a negative role. We need negotiation skills to avoid further damage, being it operational, reputational, or to the populations. And at last, I want to say that the impact of climatic change on the territories is increasing the occurrence of natural disasters, increasing the risks, and it is adding pressure on scarce resources to attend the sudden demands of vulnerable populations. That's what I can say about this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Arquímedes. Thank you, Arquímedes. Kristina, we're going to stay in this same question. You are a senior researcher on humanitarian action, peace building, and forced migration. You seek always to bridge academic research and teaching with policy and practice. And indeed, you have conducted your research in context as complex as Bangladesh. What is your perception about these changes in the context of humanitarian negotiation?
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this conversation. I'm very happy to share our thoughts today, but also for this question and introduction. So, I mean, Arquímedes already pointed out some very important things. I mean, there's this general discourse, diversification of actors. We have the politicization of aid, but he also drew attention to this very important aspect of technology and, how this may be also impacting on negotiation space and the negotiations themselves. I think they also they are embedded, these things also in other aspects such as the criminalization of aid. We see mainly through counterterrorism, for example, regulations and laws, but also, for example, anti-immigration sentiments. So in the areas I'm working on, most Bangladesh, as you mentioned, but also the Central Mediterranean and search and rescue operations. Of course, they do operate in an environment where there is also populism, there is anti-immigration sentiments, defamation activities. So this is a complex, very political setting in which they have to navigate and operate and negotiate. And another aspect I would like to point out in a different level is that also through bringing us maybe also to the topic today of, also the local actors that are involved in this, is through remote management, increasing remote management, plus the localization agenda. We have an increased involvement of local actors in negotiating for access and protection. So this is maybe a landscape where we have the diversification of actors, the politicization of aid, a general hostile environment, as Arquímides already said. I think that's the main points I would like to share here.
Okay, thank you, Kristina. Khalil, in the same kind of issue, you have been working with humanitarian negotiation from 2011 in a context as complicated as Afghanistan. The changes there are known by all of us, but has the environment changed differently for national organization than for international organization? What is your point of view?
Thank you very much. Thanks, colleagues, for having me today here from Afghanistan. A very good discussion, actually, because this question is somehow related to the concept of localization and how this might interfering by the local governments into the process of the negotiation and impacting positively or negatively. That is why addressing your points about the changing the environment, how it's affect on the local and international NGO is that there is not a unique strategy, actually, from my point of view, in terms of the negotiation. When you're going to the context for negotiating into humanitarian responses and delivery into the context, the different context, maybe Afghanistan is different from Venezuela, or maybe from other countries. So that is why this concept is not unique. You should apply different method, different strategies in order to make this ultimate objective of this negotiation, which is the access to the humanitarian responses for the vulnerable people in the communities. That is why, in the context of Afghanistan, which I would like to mention, is that different. Actually, it has been quite different for national and international NGO in terms of for this negotiation, which for the national NGOs are the easy target, actually, for the authorities in order to comply, in order to accelerate their whatever they want, whatever their orders are, in order to apply whatever they want to manipulate the humanitarian responses on the ground. So, and this will really difficult the process of negotiation. Why? Because maybe in many cases, the national NGOs, in the backstage, there is no international NGOs as the donors, maybe to support them in the context of the country, and the countries are really, or the authorities might have difficulties in order to make the process of negotiation a bit difficult. Number two, but for international NGOs, of course, the process of negotiation is, it might be another way or difference. But the other point, which is actually the process of negotiation, in the environment of negotiation, which is different between national and international NGO, is the because the national NGOs are usually used as a reference, as a kind of reference for others, that because the unique strategies are coming in the context and they would like to apply on the humanitarian agencies, either national or international NGOs. In the context of Afghanistan, you know that both agencies of national and international are registered with the Ministry of Economy, and both rules are coming from those ministries. So the international NGOs are having some power in terms of their donors, in terms of having some funding or supporting the vulnerable communities. That's why their voices are a bit bigger than the national NGOs on the context, on the ground. So that is why when they are applying those strategies on the national NGOs, it has been used as a reference for the international, and saying that, okay, these policies or whatever, interference, whatever are applying on them. So we are using with the same process, and the same expectation is going to the international or other national NGOs which they are not complying with the rules and regulations which are coming on them. And the final things I would like to say for the sake of time is which is a bit difficult, making the negotiations a bit difficult for the international NGO is the high cost. Actually, the high cost for the international NGO into the context of like Afghanistan is a bit difficult to be accepted by the authorities, because the ratio of 75-25% means 75% directly going to the program, to the beneficiaries, and 25% is coming to the support costs or program support costs in terms of the budgeting. It is not somehow acceptable. What is the consequence of this one? It is making the negotiation difficult for the international NGOs or for the national NGOs as well. That is why the context is somehow, we can say, gray. It's not black and white. For that purpose, we can say this is quite different for national and international NGOs into Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Hamsatu, you are an educator, gender activist, a peace builder recognized for your work and amplifying the voices of victims and survivors from the Boko Haram insurgency. You have led initiatives on transitional justice and advocates for alternative approach to the end of the conflict in northeastern Nigeria. What is your perception about this differentiation between the impact of contextual change among national and international actors?
Well, in fact, thank you very much. Thank you very much. A lot has been said by my colleagues on this. What I may perhaps add is as you rightly said, I'm not a professional or an academician, but a practitioner in the field. So I will always want to speak to what I witness practically rather than the theoretical aspect. So in view of this protracted conflict that I am operating I think the rise of new non-state actors also impinges, in fact, adds much to this conflict. New non-state actors in the sense that, for example, I'm working in a Boko Haram context, but Boko Haram now has become a hydra-headed monster with several heads. Criminals, bandits, and even kidnappers, and the Boko Haram itself dividing itself into several factions. Thus, in fact, a lot of restriction come to be imposed on the operations for both the local and then the internationals. Restrictions by state, for example, the military brings its own separately, while the state governments, in terms of regulations and then catering for their own interests, come with a lot of restrictions that impinge on this. And then the non-state actors also separately. Apart from the state actors, the non-state actors, the Boko Haram and others also, in their occupied territories are making it difficult to make difficult for negotiators, for example, in a humanitarian setting. And then these heightened security concerns, and then the lack of flexibility, for example, and then lack of a nuanced approach to the situation on ground, also, in fact, has placed a lot of impingement on negotiations, both for the humanitarians and the locals. But then, for the locals, yes, did you ask me about threat? The ink.
about how impact the change in national or international organization. What are the difference between the impact and then?
Yes, for the international, for the locals impact, as we engage in this, that brings us more indirect threats because you are now put in front. So facing more risk and then more threats directly as you operate in the center of this negotiation. And then this also, we also as locals sometimes impact suffer coercion from our local power dynamics, which sometimes you have to succumb to being part and parcel of the communities, and then increase, and then for the internationals, I think the increased securitization, and then increased securitization restricts the internationals from doing a lot, although they have more resources and then more capacities and then the international backings and then the legitimacy that they bring also adds to their advantage. But as local, I think more burden is now shifting on the locals, and then a lot of, perhaps, along the way, unless you are able to negotiate yourself successfully, then maybe it may lead to compromises and others in the field. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hamsatu. So, as you can see, we have here representatives from 3 very different contexts, and in all of them, the trend is the same. The humanitarian negotiation context is becoming more complicated, with more requests to local actors, because it's more and more difficult to having access for international actors, and they are always, of course, the most exposed. Okay, thank you. We will now compare approaches to humanitarian negotiation and understand successful local strategies for security humanitarian access in the context where you work. But before of that, as introduction to the issue, Kristina, from an academic point of view, which different forms can humanitarian negotiations have?
Thank you, Armando. That is a very good question indeed. And so I don't know if you had said that at the beginning, but I'm working together with Christopher Liden and others on a research project on ethical dilemmas in humanitarian negotiations at the Peace Research Institute of Oslo. And of course, when you start such a research, you start with asking yourself, what is it actually we analyze? What are humanitarian negotiations? And which might seem, come with a simple answer, it doesn't. So we had quite a discussion about it, because why? First of all, one interesting thing that Rob Grace has already, some years ago in a very good article identified is what he called a cognizance gap. So saying that while negotiation is really a part of daily practice of practitioners, so many practitioners, they do a lot of that, yeah? It's part of the work. They may not be aware of that or not conceptualize these activities as negotiations. So they could be seen as building rapport or discussions or meetings or whatever, yeah? And they find themselves in the situation without realizing what it is. Of course, over the last, let's say, at least 20 years, if not more, there was more awareness of it, that this is actually an activity that humanitarian practitioners it's really at the key, yeah, to gain access and everything. So once you're aware of it, of course, you can develop skill sets, you can address this more systematically, you can support staff in developing the skills, right? So we see the Center for Humanitarian Negotiation Competence, the CCHN that you already have met earlier. So this all plays a role in having more awareness of this now. Okay, this is one thing that we don't even know. Right? There's so many practices. And then on the other hand, and this links to it, there's a question where to draw boundaries. It's a question of boundaries, right? What is a negotiation and what is a meeting? What is a discussion? What is another practice? Is drinking tea part of the negotiation process for building rapport or not? So to capture these many activities and see how to define it. Yeah? The other question of boundaries is, what are humanitarian negotiations and how do they differ from other forms, or how do they link to, let's say, peace negotiations? Or other aspects, at the political level. So this is a question of boundaries, and we in our research, we decided to go for broad definition. So to capture the activities, especially also from, at the local level, like to capture diverse activities. So we have, using the definition, of course, subject to controversy as well, of humanitarian negotiations as negotiations between actors, identifying with a humanitarian cause, and counterparts upon whom these actors rely in order to achieve their humanitarian objectives. Now, question of boundaries, again, what is humanitarian? Yeah? Where do we draw the line? And we see many actors like either multi-mandated organizations, but also organizations at the, let's say, local or national level that might not have that prior, this humanitarian identity or not exclusively so, and also participate in human rights activism, in peace building efforts. So we see this lines there. So this is one of the things I want to draw out. I can't give you a final answer of what it is and what is not. This has been our suggestion in order to capture different activities. Yeah? And the last thing I want to say, and I'll stop then, is what we also see that all these humanitarian negotiations, they happen, of course, at different levels. So what has sometimes been called at the front lines or at the micro level, or like really at the checkpoints, in the process of delivering aid or something, to the very high political level, which could even be linked to humanitarian diplomacy at the UN Security Council. Yeah? So we see very different levels where these negotiations take place. These are the different forms, I would say. So I will stop here.
And according to your research, are there differences between the approaches of national and international organizations?
Yeah, this is, I think, a very interesting question, because it kind of, okay. So in general, I do have some unease with juxtaposing the international with the local so much, right? So when we look at the settings, there might be but what we call local actors or international actors, and there's this idea that the local organizations that act very differently from international ones, which may be the case. But on the other hand, what we see is also that the staff does, move from one organization to the other. So they may work sometimes for international organizations, then for more community-based organizations, and of course with that also certain skills and knowledge they bring with them. Yeah? So it's not so clear-cut, and I want to make sure that we not see it a bit more complex than that, the international and the local, and see the different facets of it. Having said that, with this caveat in mind, I still want to say that especially our research within the project, we have several case studies, and one of them is Bangladesh, as you pointed out earlier. And there we particularly looked at the experiences of, let's call them so-called local negotiators, and try to understand how they experience this role in negotiation, the negotiations and the dilemmas. And I had to very much think about what Hamsatu just said now, and in the research and also discussions with others, we have this feeling there is like the role of being in between. Yeah. So there are caught between different loyalties. As Hamsatu said, it could be being part and parcel of the community itself, but then representing an international maybe organization, being like maybe a local national staff of the organization. We have seen that many issues come up when negotiating with the authorities, the national authorities, at every level, at local level. So this role of in-betweens is working both for their advantage, because having the intimate knowledge and being very able to navigate this power dynamics that Hamsatu referred to, or knowing how to approach people, who are the right people to talk to, understanding all that. But on the other hand, there might be very much more under pressure. Yeah? For example, expected loyalties as fellow citizens. Yeah, so the authorities may say, "Yeah, but you are national, so you have to be on our side. This is our policy." And it's like, "No, we are actually representing the humanitarian community. We want to uphold the principles." And they start translating also between the different actors and become this kind of intermediary. Yeah? And what we then kind of took out from that is it's maybe so much more a question of what is called positionality. Like, how do they perceive themselves? Like, as local, as being part of a representative of an organization, of an international organization, part of the community. Where do they position themselves in that humanitarian context? And how are they perceived by others? Because they may very well have a professional identity of a representative of an international NGO, yeah? But then from the counterparts, they're just being the fellow citizens or locals and are put into that position when negotiating. So they have to develop different strategies. And I think the others with their experience at the practical level can maybe say that reflects what they experience and maybe also share some examples. Yeah, let me stop here. Sorry, that was long.
Thank you, Kristina. Actually, yes, Khalil or Hamsatu, what is your experience regarding this point? Which are the difference in the approaches from national and international organizations regarding the negotiation?
Well, for me, working in the context of on the ground, actually, I can say that everybody in the organization should be a negotiator. Everybody, from the senior management up to the level who are working in the field. The approach is whatever Kristina from the economic perspective mentioned in the researchers, somehow apply in the context on the ground, but somehow we can say different for the national and international NGOs when they are applying or going to have their own approaches for them. Coming back to the context of my country, in that context, actually, first, the UN is in the front line for bigger policies and strategies coming down from the authorities in order to undermining the humanitarian principles. The UN is in front line to do the negotiation in order to try to protect the agencies. But for somehow we can say in majority cases it's not working because when there is an issue is coming out, nobody is going to be against that from the authorities. Everybody is protecting that one because nobody say no or yes against that one. So the negotiation in upper level by UN is not very well supportive on that context. So it comes down to their own approaches of the agencies themselves. That the organization, both national and international, will apply their own strategies, their own method, their own negotiation platforms in many layers in order to accelerate the process for that purpose. Usually it's different from international and national NGOs. Like in my country, when an expat colleague is going for negotiation, that will work better than the national staff is going, even if that person is a junior staff. So it doesn't matter because they perceive that maybe that person is the key decision maker and that decision maker should be in the front line in order to navigate and solve the problem. So it is working well. Sometimes we can say the national NGOs, despite saying that localization is good on the ground, but there are some cons about the localization concept, which is not the forum here to discuss now about that, which is this one is one of the issue that sometimes the local NGOs or national NGOs are not very well in order to support themselves against any policies coming which is undermining the humanitarian principles or the donor red lines. And this might somehow, they will take two strategies. Either say goodbye to the funding and talk to the donor and reimburse or refund back, or undermining their transparency and accountability. And they see someone saying lying to the donors. This is the actual practice on the ground which is happening. This is the first one. The second issue is important that the international NGOs, in terms of the approaches, are quite, we can say, flexible because they are having multi-area intervention. if the area, one area is soft in my country, the other area is hard. So if that area is not working in terms of negotiation, in terms of anything is not working, they're shifting the funding to other areas. But for national NGOs, it's not working. National NGOs are quite restricted in one location, and they have to be going back and forward in order to make this happen. Otherwise, they have to talk to the donors, or in many cases, the national NGOs are not talking to the donors and trying to somehow going forward to manipulate the process, or maybe in somehow we can say adjusting themselves with the situation in order to undermining the humanitarian principle in some cases. That is the issue which the approaches of the national NGOs and international are different. And finally, if I can wrap up here, this part for the approaches is that the national NGOs actually, they do their negotiation in the lower level platforms, because they can, in many cases which I practice, because I'm leading in my organization the negotiation platforms and also mobilizing our colleagues in different areas in order to do the negotiation with different layers of authorities, we do build our relationship in the bottom lines, because that works well. And then we try to influence on them in order to influence on their senior management from authorities to make this happen. Because the humanitarian intervention is happening on the ground. So but for the international NGOs, the scenario is quite different. Despite they are doing also the ground level of negotiation, but majority of this escalation is happening in the upper level, doing the negotiation with the ministry level or the governor level in order to make this happen and coming down to the area. Because they are quite flexible in order to shifting the funding from one area to other area. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Hamsatu, let me put you a similar question, but in a different way. What works well when negotiating access, and what doesn't?
What has worked?
What works well
okay.
when we have to negotiate access?
Thank you very much. I think before even I come to what works, or do I restrict myself to your question first before deviating? Yes. Number one, I think what works most will be something like building trust is very, very important. Yes, building trust with locals in terms as activists, as local humanitarian actors, as well as with the communities. And then demonstrating neutrality and then maybe impartiality. Because in fact, in many humanitarian contexts, in fact, locals and communities, including local actors, have accused, in fact, international humanitarian actors of being somehow partial or never neutral, particularly in the case of the environment I'm working with. ICRC has suffered along that line. Yes, maybe it may be a misinformation or disinformation, but then because of their close nature of not, in fact, relating openly with people and others, that, in fact, they suffer these consequences of being accused of being impartial or even aiding and abating even the extremists themselves. Then I think leveraging on local networks and knowledge is very, very important for those who are able to do it. Yesterday, people are talking about how do they open more offices or scale up their interventions in these volatile environments in view of the current geopolitical shifts where, in fact, funding for humanitarian and other activities are being cut across globally. Yes, so therefore you don't need to, in fact, go practically to set up. Maybe the challenge will be identifying sincere, dedicated, and trusted local actors so that you can leverage on their knowledge, expertise, and experience so that they can operate like the international themselves being there in the field. So many others have tried it and then it has worked. And then maybe ensuring transparency in communications, yes, is very, very important. Yes, we have seen how it has in fact helped others, and then in many cases, actors that are not transparent in communication, particularly the one I mentioned in the, maybe they call it, yes, is ethic, is their ethics, is something like that. But then this closeness in communicating with locals' impact brings a lot of problems. And then we have seen how it has worked well for those who are able to open up. And then using intermediaries trusted by all parties, yes. In localizing negotiation, definitely you have to use local intermediaries. But then those local intermediaries, how do you ensure that they are trusted and then whatever they do is acceptable to all the parties, be they state or even the parties in the conflict or even or others in the communities. So it's very, very important if adopting this measure can help a lot. And then aligning humanitarian objectives with interests of the negotiating parties also is a strategy that works really. Yes, while you negotiate, you ensure that the humanitarian objectives are aligned with the interests of the negotiating counterparts, maybe the state governments, then the communities affected, or those fighting each other. Because I am telling you this in view of my experiences of working in a place where asymmetric warfare is taking place, that is, voice of the community are fighting their government. So therefore, in fact, adopting such strategies of aligning your objective with the interests of all helps a lot. And then avoid over-rigidity, yes, particularly with international actors, and then maybe a lack of cultural sensitivity, yes. But now I have seen many actors, in fact, adopting this, because I can see people coming from the West, by the time they come to my community, they wear maybe hijabs, the women covering their heads and others. Yes, this is cultural sensitivity. Yes, in a context where people feel they are very religious. In fact, being conscious of what the people believe in and accept will give you more acceptability and credibility, and then it has helped, in fact, in grounding certain actors that have been working in the context I am working. So, and also, yes, being perceived as politically motivated also can undermine. Yes, in the context I'm operating, yes, Nigeria is in a political government. And then, you know, politics in our context, they said, is a very, very dirty game. And then being perceived to be apolitical also can undermine humanitarian interventions and then negotiations. So with this, I think if these things have been carefully watched, what do yes, I think I have something here. Yes, I have so many papers, yes. Yes, so I think if such things can be adhered to, it will minimize a lot and then go a lot to help the locals who, in fact, I think can gain greater influences working in such contexts like this. In spite of the fact that we as locals face greater risks, violence, and even manipulation, like in the cases of ICRC staff, a girl and a pregnant woman were abducted and then even kept for months, well fed, but then eventually executed. But then in spite of all this, but then it gives us greater influences, honestly. Being seen in the front line, negotiating on behalf of international actors. And then although also maintaining neutrality and for us, and independence in view of the fact that, yes, you are a son and daughter of the community, you are a local, and then being seen with an international leading negotiation in them, or for them, honestly, is a challenge for us, maintaining particularly our neutrality in a context and independence in such a context. And then for the international also, although this will lead you to more reliance on local actors, yes, definitely, but then it can be of advantage as well as disadvantage depending on the power relations. So it can hinder or even enhance your negotiations depending on who the local actor you are engaging in is. And then, but then after all, the overall impact consequences, I think, is a more program unless and until such measures are adopted, then we are seeing a lot of more fragmented and complex negotiation complex, where in fact power dynamics are being redefined and then necessitating new strategies, which are, I think, the professionals, my colleagues here who are joining online and the ones seated with me have really highlighted, of which the strategies in which I have very limited knowledge in, but I'm happy they have filled that gap for me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamsatu. If you were there this morning, there was a proposal about abandoning neutrality and assuming a political position. It seems in some contexts, at least in some contexts, it's not the best option. You start mentioning, Hamsatu, about the challenge. Arquímides, I'm going to you. What are the biggest challenges for humanitarian negotiation when negotiating with vis-a-vis with authoritarian authorities or with authoritarian practices?
Thank you for this extremely important question, Armando. I want to rescue some ideas that Khalil and Hamsatu has said before me. They are talking about a negotiation mindset that is across all levels, the frontline negotiations in the field or the upper levels of government or international organizations' negotiation processes. There shall be instead a mindset of building trust. Negotiation is about the legitimacy of the actors involved, in my opinion. So we have to build it. And in an authoritarian regime, as I see it, there is no rule of law. And I think it is wise to build a larger set of connections because we're talking with humans, focusing on people and their influence on the power mechanisms. You will engage in negotiations with flesh and bone persons with their own set of motivation, values, and logic. Recognizing them is a challenge, but it is also an asset. I have to say that this negotiation mindset and this role as intermediaries between the fields of humanitarian and the context is part of the role we play as locals. And as repression and restrictions in the access are part of the tools that the authoritarians handle when dealing with humanitarians, I believe we have to engage in a more strategic game. The solo approach, the cowboy approach, is almost ineffective. We have to strengthen our relationships, our network with local civil society actors that may lead to strength, the resilience, as the accountability with the regime. I like to use this metaphor. We have to set a dolphin strategy game. We work together, we collaborate together in order to keep us as alive as possible and not as sardines set. The sardines, they build up trying to see who is the next one who is going to be eaten, but not me. So if we strengthen our relationship network, it can help us to negotiate and to increase our legitimacy in front of that authoritarian regimes. And we always have to be aware of the security risks faced by the different stakeholders. We have to recognize everyone's red lines and act accordingly to it. Remember that when we are in the field, sometimes the local communities have to face negotiation processes with non-state armed groups or with authorities, and they are more vulnerable than we are. And we have to distinguish this red lines and the bottom lines they have to face. And as always, preparation, preparation, preparation. It's too risky to go blind or one-eyed in authoritarian regime negotiation process. And therefore, I am also thankful for the CCHN because they have taught us, they have led us into this knowledge of negotiation processes that help us understand these shifting power mechanisms. And that's all what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Arquímedes. We'll now dive deeper into the dilemmas of humanitarian staff working in conflict environments and facing difficult decision-making during the negotiation process. So I would like to stay in Venezuela for a while. Arquímedes, which practical security and ethical dilemmas are organizations facing in a country like Venezuela? And which are the mechanisms to deal with these difficult decisions?
But in terms of what we face, there are stressing situations when you have the violation of human rights in front of your actions, and you have the pressure of politicization of the aid. And these dilemmas are stressing forces around the humanitarian principles. And we have to deal it in a practical way, but without putting in risk other organizations and other stakeholders that are in play. So I think there is no simple rule or a simple method to approach these tensions. You have to face a concrete object of negotiation and see what's the less bad output you can have from this stressing situation and the decisions you have to make in the negotiation field, the concessions you have to make. So there's no rule of thumb, I think, Armando. I'm sorry that I couldn't understand and couldn't answer with a practical approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Arquímedes. And Kristina, from an academic perspective, always, which are the dilemmas you have found in your research?
Yes, so in our research, we're trying to exactly map them out. And yes, it's academic, but also our research is designed in a way that we get the practitioner's perspective on it, and then first understand what kind of dilemmas do they experience. And the CCHN has already made a good list of these dilemmas within their community of practice to understand, how the security of staff, for example, or the safety of others is one of these dilemmas, or between principled action and pragmatic compromises. There are a lot of dilemmas that we see are experienced in many cases, right? They're often are linked to, feeling that on the one hand there are the humanitarian principles, and there are pressures, demands that actually would jeopardize them, upholding these principles. So organizations are then discussing their red lines. They have to decide where are the red lines in the negotiations, where are we not going further in the compromises. And so we're trying to map that, and then also understand what are the ethical concerns in there, right? And there are different reasonings. What I want to say is, in general, what we see is that many of the things that we discuss now in relation to humanitarian negotiations is actually a reflection of general dilemmas we find in humanitarian action. They really kind of consolidate in humanitarian negotiations. And of course, there are then dilemmas that are very much linked to negotiation process itself, whom to include, how many stakeholders, all this. But this is then at some point when practitioners are in these situations, it's, of course, there's this principle of not doing harm, but in these situations, when we are faced with dilemmas, right, there's more the question of what is the lesser evil. And that is more so in the case even on authoritarian, dealing with authoritarian regimes or practices. which has been very worked out. I want to do some advertisement here by Andrew Cunningham in his book on authoritarian practices and humanitarian negotiations. There are many case studies of how that affects the dilemmas and the situation of negotiations. So where you have to strike compromises, and the humanitarian practitioners risk becoming political instruments, right? Also for a certain authoritarian ruler, for example. Yeah? So in these situations, what comes up, yes, the red lines and all that, are also questions of complicity. And we found that very interesting, and especially Christopher Liden, with whom I work on this project, we have kind of looked at the issue of complicity also from an ethical perspective. And we see a lot in the discourse, well, you're complicit to this, you should either stay or go, right? And if you stay, you get complicit because you kind of support maybe the authoritarian ruler or whoever is there putting pressures on you. And what we want, and this is the main point I want to make here, what we see is actually, what we argue is complicity per se is not necessarily blameworthy. That it's a sliding scale. It depends on how much the humanitarian organization is, let's say, really how bad the wrongdoing was, how much they informed, how much there's a causal inference, how much they really contributed to it, or would it have happened anyways? So we see just in the discourse on this complicity and questions of ethics in certain decisions that we need a more nuanced approach to capture also this responsibility here. Another thing I want to say, what we have experienced, and I'm very happy for that we have this panel here today, is that practitioners are really, it's also a mental health issue, I would say at some point, because they really have to make very difficult decisions, and they may not have long time to reflect on it. Sometimes I leave it left alone, even at the front lines, not communicating with the headquarters, and so there is a need to address it and not to put blame on anyone, but to share this experience and have lessons learned. So a colleague from us also has identified this tacit engagement, and this, so Aisha Balakal has written on this culture of silence. Because what we see is many organizations have to push the red lines, or decide to do so, or in the moment have to take compromises they, of course, don't feel comfortable with, because it's not an ideal world. But then there's little sharing of that, or silenced, maybe not even reporting up to higher levels of fear for repercussions, or the higher levels don't even want to hear it because then they cannot be held liable. So, this kind of thing that is going on there is makes it very difficult to really talk about these dilemmas and what are the best strategies. And it also brings us to the whole debate on collective action, how can we, because maybe sometimes there's an organization that has struck a deal and a compromise, and the others are not even aware of it, and they stick to the red lines, and it becomes all a bit a turf war and a bit difficult. For very good reasons, I'm saying not sharing of information is also protection, right? So, but yeah, these are things that we have identified as dynamics when it comes to dilemmas and that humanitarian practitioners are experiencing.
Okay, thank you, Kristina. Khalil, do you feel reflect in this intervention from Kristina? Which are the dilemmas you are facing in the field, and which mechanism do you use? Also from a personal point of view, how do you deal the mechanisms you can have yourself when you are doing a negotiation and you find yourself in this kind of situation with a dilemma you have to face?
Well, thank you very much. I think what Kristina already covered was the most comprehensive points that majority is almost matching with the reality on the ground. Again, I emphasize that the context is different. So that's whatever I'm saying as a practitioner is depending to the context of Afghanistan, particularly what we are practicing for now. in such a stressful situation, when there is a dilemma is happening, or there are some dilemmas in terms of humanitarian responses and also in terms of negotiation, first, we are trying to manage in a certain ways which is approved by the senior management of the organization, and somehow, first of all, protecting the red lines of the donors. Secondly, trying to protecting the principles, the humanitarian principle, whatever is given to us. What already highlighted by my colleague, the first of all, the things we do is the building relationship is the first things that we are trying to make in its own personal experiences in order to make the situation somehow under control and manage the situation. What does it mean? It does not mean that we are doing or compromising the red lines. We are not compromising any of the humanitarian principle, but we are trying to make our best in order to spending time and having negotiation, having discussions with them in order to make these things a bit like the tension is decreased, and then trying to solve the issues. The second, what we are trying to make the process whatever which is acceptable by the donors and acceptable in the humanitarian platforms, which we try to make ourselves adjust with them. What does it mean? That they are requesting us for registration of the projects. They are asking us for the monitoring and having someone from them to do the monitoring or having some observation of the projects or the humanitarian intervention on the ground. So we are trying to make ourselves in a way that at least we are trying to implement those things which are somehow acceptable. And then we, in other ways, when there are some other dilemmas, we try to control or manage that situation. So in our statistic also, we are trying to be very transparent and honest in order to saying everything in the first presentation, and the first impression is giving to the authorities in the first lines that, yes, actually, this is the capacity, this is the red lines by donors, these are our limited capacity, these are our gaps, and everything is communicated very well with them, with the authorities. So this is trying to somehow reducing any sort of expectation, any sort of dilemmas in the future in the midway of the project, which is happening. This is somehow, we can say, the experience is happening in Afghanistan, which we are practicing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to you, Khalil. Let's pass to the last part of the panel. I'm going to ask you to be brief because we are running out of time. But I think it's important. Let's focus now in the future. How to go forward. We will try to identify lessons learned and recommendations for international actors on how to improve access through negotiation and to best support national organizations. So, Hamsatu, what are our blind spots with regard to humanitarian negotiation?
Yes, quickly let me add to the dilemma also. Maybe in our context, politicization of humanitarian aid, and then the scrutinization of that is balancing the need for security measures and then with principles of independence is really another dilemma. And then accusation of complicity and collaboration, which I kept repeating, also is another dilemma that is being faced. Then coming to the blind spots, really, I think one major one is this overlooking of local complexities, local context. Yes, people assume, yes, it's a humanitarian situation, it is the same everywhere, and then profile the solution, while actually there is never a one-size-fits-all approach in this. So therefore, overlooking this particular thing, particularly of context specificity, honestly, is a blind spot that dents impact humanitarian intervention. And then insufficient inclusion of local voices. For example, the voices of women, the voices of victims and survivors and others. Yes, People, yeah, in a situ context, people say all of us, they are all conflict affected people. But then the level of being infected is quite different from the different actors. So therefore, unless you have sufficient knowledge of this complexity as it affects individuals differently, I think you are missing something very important. And then understanding the impact of power imbalance, yes, is very, very important in context of humanitarian aid. And then limited flexibility and then adaptability, which is a very, very strong feature in our humanitarian interventions and negotiations, is another factor that we close our eyes to, but then honestly, it is impacting negatively. And then also neglecting the long-term consequences. Yes, people focus rather on maybe immediate outcomes and then results and others, neglecting the long-term consequences of what it will lead to. So I think we need to look further to impact beyond the immediate gains and then results. Do I proceed or add more?
We can ask also Khalil, what is your opinion on the matter? Which are the blind spots? If you want to complete Hamsatu?
Actually, thanks, Hamsatu. Actually, we can say yes, majority parts. What we believe that the colleagues in the international perspective, when they're coming down to the ground in areas like our countries, like Afghanistan, maybe Nigeria, or any part, it's better that considering some points that really, because our first issue is to save the life for the humanitarian intervention. Saving the lives means that meanwhile, and the bottom line is the do no harm principle, the bottom line of the humanitarian principle. What does it mean? It does not only for the beneficiaries, also for our staff as well. When we mobilize our staff and we do not consider those blind spots which has been raised in this session, we are somehow at risking our staff as well as the beneficiaries or our target people and population. So that is why there are some specific things in my context should be considered, which also in some other contexts also that might be applicable as per having interaction with our expat colleagues who are having some other experiences in Yemen, in Middle East overall, in Asia or Africa. When we have interaction, because I have the international background as well, I believe that we will somehow save our staff from the high risk. I can give an example of this year, 2024, that not considering some of the major issues, it's a few points, that to convey the message to our staff, we put our staff at risk and being in detention of 24 hours by authorities. Sorry that I'm very conservative here to discuss because I'm going back to Afghanistan like in a few days. That's why I will be conservative in my language. That is why the blind spot is first that the international colleagues who are coming down to the countries for implementation, they have to know that there is no unique strategy in terms of the access, that they are coming to on a screen the access strategy on the screen and saying for the staff, these are the only strategies, go ahead and do the implement. No, it's not working. In majority cases, it should be context analysis and it should be contextualized. And after that, reviewing, having some sort of experience and knowledge, learning from the local staff, and learning and also adjusting them. When they adjust together, merging both the local concept and also the international standard, both together, we can have a better outcome. Otherwise, we will risk our staff as well as our target population. The other things in my context, when I'm going for negotiation, what do I do? First, I evaluate the person I'm going to go for negotiation. That person, who is that person? In which level? I interact with those agencies that they had a kind of interaction with that guy. And I talk to my counterparts in other agencies that, hey, what was your impression from that guy? What are the best and worst things about that guy? Collecting some more information. Trying to adjust my appearances in a way, because you know Afghanistan is a conservative and traditional society with the local clothing. I cannot go with such jeans to to the meeting for negotiation. And otherwise, it will have adverse impact, and maybe they will shut down my organization and cancel my license. So that's why I'm going in a way that is actually with a knowledge and analysis of the background and whatever is going. And the language. In Afghanistan, we have several languages. And when you're going for negotiation, you should know the language of that specific person in negotiation. If you are having in a language which that person is not, you would not go for having a positive impact on that one, rather than one person in a junior position even is going to have with the same language. And the other issue, sorry to say this, the bad things, but unfortunately, when a female colleague is going for the negotiation as a team leader or as a member of the team, I mean the national staff, not the expat. The female national staff, when they are going, it will have a negative impact in the negotiation. We should be avoid of that. This is a scenario. Maybe it's not acceptable in other, maybe it's not some issue, a big issue in other contexts. But in context of my countries, this is a big issue, which we have to consider as a blind spot, and consulting our expat colleagues who are coming down to the ground and going to do the negotiation in a bigger forum in order to accelerate the humanitarian intervention. And the final thing, which I consult always, and I'm saying as a practitioner in the context that the same level should be in the meeting with the same level. When the junior expat or staff is going for the meeting with the higher level position, it's not working. I remember one time I went for a meeting. I was the deputy of an organization, an international organization, and I had a meeting with the director of that department. And that person said, what is your position? He did not ask me, and even did not know that what is my position, because I was the program manager, I was the budget holder for that big portfolio, but he did not know that one. He just wanted to see the director only. He didn't want to meet me and say, sorry, I have nothing to do with you. Go and ask your director to come to the meeting. And say, okay, thank you very much. These are the things which are really, really helpful and practical in order to know as a blind spot, and maybe some other major issues as a bigger ones that can be applied in different contexts uniquely, or maybe separate from one context to other contexts. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. The very last question I ask you, Arquímides, is going to be to you, but to be really brief on that. How could locally led negotiation be best supported by the international partners?
Well, I have to rescue that Khalil made a good statements about the concrete set of issues we have in every different context. And that's a thing that international partners shall keep in mind. There is no general rule for locally led negotiations to be assumed. I'm sure the rhetorical phrase capacity building will emerge, and it is good. But the limitations for me is the practice of this, how it is done. Training alone is not enough and is untimely. Coaching or mentoring could be useful, but limited too. Partnering, a real concrete partnering is strong, but it requires self-recognition among peers. Maybe a mixture of these three approaches can help. I encourage organizations to build communities of practice for the negotiation mindset, to build a stronger partnership mechanisms, build long-lasting relationships, not for the sake of a short-term project, but thinking of a larger relationship. Building trust takes time. And I think the scope of both levels, international, local organization, can contribute to enhance our opportunities for negotiation, the windows of opportunities for negotiation. So it is easy said, not so easily done. But worlds, local and international, have to strengthen their relationship on the field, leaving this space for negotiation with enriching practices from both worlds. We're intermediates as local levels, we know more the culture and the things, but we are also with the burden of the local mindset. And maybe international mindset can help us overcome this scope of vision. That's all can I say, cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arquímides. So let's open the floor, just 5 minutes, to some questions that can come from the audience. I have one here, please.
Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I have a few questions. The first one is for Hajia Hamsatu. So I would like to know how you have been able to deal with implementation time pressure versus the time frame you need to negotiate access. And I have another question for Khalil. This is just me being very inquisitive. Have you ever been in a position where your neutrality was questioned, and how did you deal with it? And my third question is quite general, so anyone can take it. It's about the trend of unsuccessful negotiations in the hottest conflict zones, Gaza, Ukraine. Is that impacting in your region somehow? Because we see this as a trend of negotiations being unsuccessful and the impact it has on the ground in actually implementing humanitarian action. Thank you. Yes, yes.
So do you want to answer, Hamsatu?
Yes, you was asking of how we deal with implementation times and others. Well, maybe my last a question which Armando didn't ask me could have answered your questions, because I have some recommendations here that will be able to impact. Let me use this opportunity to say some of them. Yes, for the internationals, and I think what you need to do to be successful is adopt flexibility in your funding, so that we, the locals, have time and then resources to manipulate and respond to the needs of our communities appropriately, so long as we can equitably account for the funds and resources. And then you should facilitate in building our capacities as locals before you put us in front, to avoid any of those lapses, because with a built capacity and skills in my hand, there is no way I can battle the problem of with time limit and others. And then promote local leadership. By promoting, you are not giving up your positions or local standing, but rather impact enhancing your partner. And then support logistic, support logistic approaches, consider the broader social, political, and then economic context, rather than focusing on immediate access and outcomes. I said that before, is very, very important. In fact, you have to compare and measure it against the wider scope, socially, economically, and then politically, so that rather than, and then when you do that, in fact, the access will be very, very maybe unlimited, and then the outcomes will just be coming out on their own. So I think with this, I have talked to her, maybe addressed your question or what, something. My own experience.
To the point, please, Hamsatu.
I'll continue, and then coming back to you.
I will come back.
Addressing your first point, many times happening. When you work on the ground in the context of the implementation, you will daily face that your neutrality is undermining. That is why we do the negotiation. If this is not under questioning, then there is no negotiation. The only negotiation, why negotiation is important, and now the conversation is continuing, is because of this one. I can give one example, I was budget holder, a program manager in one of the INGOs, and mobilizing our staff to the field for covering 200 vulnerable households in one of the districts of my province, in the western part of the country in Afghanistan. And then X-person, I'm not going to name, very conservative, X-person was asking my team leader that we're sharing 25 of our members to be part of this. in order to receive the assistance. Otherwise, you cannot continue. We continued the negotiation for 2 days and until if we can find an option. But unfortunately, we could not find an option because that was a kind of a very powerful person that what should we do on that spot? So we had another back in the backstage, like we can say in a backup area with the same vulnerability criteria. I consulted with my senior management, including the national and expat colleagues, and we decided to withdraw from that specific district and mobilizing the resources in another district. Look, this is one scenario I had faced. So there might be some scenario that there is no other option in the backstage, there is no backup. What should you do? That is why I said there is no black and white in negotiation. If there was no any in the backstage or maybe backup vulnerability community, I had to continue until that would be solved. Otherwise, that fund will be shifted. The final option will be that fund will be shifted to other area. So this is something will be happening. Coming back to your second point, unsuccessful negotiation, what is the impact of that on the ground? For the national community, that is we perceive, means we national organizations, but I'm against this, what I'm saying. That we believe this is a kind of sense of failure, that we are not successful in order to do the negotiation, and maybe the fund is going to be withdrawn back to the donor. So that is why at the beginning of my speech I say that sometimes the national NGOs are undermining their transparency and not honest with their donors and trying to somehow compromise in a very limited spaces on the ground, and the donor is not aware of that. So that is why. This is something I do not believe for that. I believe in part of my things that I prepared, I noted down that we have to be open and transparent with the donor, even if the program is delaying for several months, even if that intervention might be taken back from us and giving to another person. This is not a sense of failure. The failure is when you are compromising and manipulating the entire process of humanitarian, because we are humanitarian practitioner on the ground, and we are not looking at things like in black and white. We look at things on the gray, but somehow, sometimes we are in a very difficult situation to decide. Nobody is helping us. We have to decide and take the difficult decision, and the consequence of that might be positive or negative. That will be coming outcome later. I hope I addressed your points.
Thank you, Khalil. Maybe let's give the opportunity for maybe 2 last questions, please.
Actually, I have a comment. Usually, I worked for the South area in Lebanon, and I was heading the office for International Rescue Committee, and I would like to share my experience. Mainly, international staff possess certain protection, which local don't possess, and they are faced to their destiny when the funding is cut, and this is something that affects definitely, and this is why you have certain complicity, because usually the people who are arrested or questioned are mainly the local staff, and international staff leave us to our destiny, and this is a comment to international community as well. Another thing is about human rights in certain areas, specifically in Lebanon and other areas, surrounding areas. They are seen as a form of neocolonialism that cannot address the current injustices, and this as well create a certain distrust, and they are seen as neocolonialism entities. Speaking about negotiation, I've had experience in negotiating with non-state actors and state actors in the south of Lebanon, and usually the financial aspect was an important aspect to grant access. Where are the boundaries in this sense, and do financial aspect is part of negotiation as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe the very last question.
Hello, I'm Caroline from NOHA, Network of Humanitarian Action. Actually, my question is split into 3 different aspects that were mentioned throughout the presentations. The first one will go back to the politicization of a humanitarian, which was something that was also talked about in the previous session. And there's that risk of humanitarians becoming sort of political slaves. So entering the political show as probably being instrumentalized and being used to achieve some of the hidden political agendas. So I would like to hear from the panel if you believe or if you think that the humanitarian evolving into having a more politically engaged action would undermine the process of negotiations, or would it be advantages in that sense? That's a part of the question, number one. The second part would go to the cultural and social context and respect for the social norms. As we have been seeing, it's been really difficult to achieve common lines. So each position, each side or counterpart of the negotiations usually have a strong fixed red lines or limits that they would not compromise in terms of cultural, social, political preferences or beliefs. And in terms of negotiation, there's much more to see than what is obvious. So we have the iceberg below, what we can see, what is hidden in terms of beliefs, of values. What happens when there's a deadlock, when negotiations are not moving forward, when it's stagnant? What strategies do you find to keep the conversation going without just being repetitive to reach an outcome? And finally, just to be very brief, I would like to ask then to, I think, Kristina, because of the example that you used, nowadays with disinformation and the rise of extremist narratives and the discourse on anti-immigration, and we also see that in Europe, unfortunately, I would like to ask you, how do you deal with the lack of political will to change this? Because we have been seeing the trend is not going properly in the migrant or refugee-friendly way. So in a negotiation, when you have to deal with so many counterparts from the private sector, public sector, even elites, how do you manage to build that bridge? That would be my last intervention. Thank you.
Many questions are not easy, but you have, if you want to react, 1 minute, each one maximum to answer, at least some of them. Who want to start? Hamsatu?
Own strategy. She is, in fact, I work so inclusively. In fact, there is no actor that I don't work and then interact with, both state, non-state, including even the extremists themselves in my context. So much so that, and I have created a wide range of social networks until maybe I mentioned them, you cannot even imagine. I currently have about 12 different professional social networks, all of them are my partners, and then we work across, in fact, carry inclusive advocacies and then implement inclusively. So that, in fact, whether I am around or not, my work continues, and then I enjoy that leverage in my community. And then, yes, for the strategies, I think I'm not the best to speak on this. Maybe Kristina and then those online can better handle that for you in view of time constraint. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Hamsatu. Kristina, Arquímides, do you want to briefly react?
It's just on the politicization of aid. There is no general strategy, I think. But if you compromise the neutrality, you, I think, are barely guessing or betting on the bad side of the scale, because you will lose legitimacy and you will undermine trust. Remember, communities also form part of this politicization. So community members are impacted by politicization. And if you take a political point of view, you're engaging in a long-term relationship with a shot on your foot. So I don't think politicization could be useful in my context. I believe that we have to deal with this in a strategic way, translating the humanitarian principles to the political actors and telling these are our red lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. And I go to the last one, what this was more targeted towards me, but it links to what Arquímides just said, or what everyone said. So first of all, I would say there is a very contextual, right? So when I talk about, for example, anti-immigration sentiments and the politics around it, and you referred also to Europe, right? So we see this in the European context, and we have also looked at it in Bangladesh, where we also have a displacement crisis. So I'm not sure if you can extrapolate from one situation to the other. When it comes to the European context, it is very interesting to see the strategies, right, that are being used. And in this particular context, one of the ways is, for example, what we have seen is not so much negotiations actually happening, but actually legal action. So many organizations have brought certain issues and situations to the court to gain access and, fight certain policies and regulations that have been, for example, implemented by the Italian authorities. For example, so there is like this legal ways of addressing the issue, fighting for the rights. There is also, in these cases, the whole media attention that was there, especially some years ago on search and rescue operations, was maybe also not very helpful, because then, the organizations, yes, in a way you draw attention to the problem, but it was getting, they were referred to as taxis, working together with smugglers, and you have all the defamation. So in a way, like going a little bit under the media radar is helping to have less attention on it, because you have also the public discourse on the anti-immigrant sentiment. And a third strategy that I feel is ongoing at the moment, which is quite interesting, again, European context, where you have a lot of rights activists and solidaristic groups, right? There is a movement or like a push towards making it more seen as a humanitarian approach and a humanitarian space, the sea and the search and rescue, like getting away from the rights discourse, but more like these are people in need. Our work is humanitarian. We uphold the principles. We are not so much linking up with the asylum system and questions, but we save lives. So trying, and this is a way of trying not to be political. And that's why I'm saying, like, that goes back to your question of whether it should be more political. In this case, I think many organizations or some organizations argue that making it not a political discourse, not more like a humanitarian discourse, may help to, protect the space for action.
Okay. Unfortunately, we have to stop here. Thank you, Kristina. Thank you, all of you. It has been really interesting. I hope you enjoy, as myself, I enjoy. We have now a 30 minutes, 20 minutes coffee break, and see you 15. So sorry. Thank you to be here.